You know what I realized, Caroline? You were always supposed to be temporary. Dennis didn't even look up from his phone when he said it. We were sitting in our kitchen. Our kitchen, I thought then, foolishly. He was scrolling through something, half smiling at the screen. It was the casual delivery that made it so much worse. Like he was commenting on the weather, like he was mentioning that it might rain later. Like I was nothing more than a passing observation. What? I said, though I'd heard him perfectly. Every syllable, every implication. Temporary. He glanced up, almost friendly. Almost like we were sharing a joke. Just something I was thinking about. How nothing's really permanent, you know? Then he went back to his phone. Left me sitting there with my coffee going cold in my hands. Left me wondering what that meant. Left me feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This was 3 months before I found the folder. Before I understood what he meant. Before I learned that I had spent 30 years. 30 years. Married to a man who'd been married to someone else. The entire time. But to understand how I got there, how I spent 3 decades as legally invisible as a ghost, you need to go back to the beginning. Back to when I was young enough to believe. When I was naive enough to trust. I met Dennis when I was 32. Late bloomer, my mother called it. Though she meant it as criticism. My mother meant most things as criticism. That was her language. Her love was wrapped in disappointment. Always had been. I'd been focused on my nursing career, on building something of my own, on being someone who mattered, not to a man, but to myself. I worked at Street, Vincent's hospital, the emergency department, 12-hour shifts that left me exhausted, but satisfied. I saved lives, real lives, held hands in the darkest moments, whispered comfort to the dying, celebrated with families when patients pulled through. I was good at my job, really good, the kind of nurse doctors requested, the kind patients remembered, the kind who could spot a heart attack before the machines caught up. Dennis was 41 when we met, confident, established. He walked into the emergency room one Thursday evening, not as a patient, as a visitor. His colleague had had a minor accident at work, nothing serious, a broken wrist, paperwork to sign. I was at the desk when he came in. He asked directions. I pointed the way. He smiled. That smile, the one that seemed genuine, the one that seemed to see something in me worth noticing. You must be the one keeping this place running, he said. It was a line. I knew it was a line even then, but it was a good line. And I was tired of being invisible, tired of going home to an empty apartment, tired of watching my friends get married while I worked double shifts. He came back the next day, brought coffee. For the woman who keeps the ER running, he said. The coffee was perfect, strong, with just a little cream. He'd noticed what I was drinking the night before. He'd paid attention. The nurses at the desk exchanged glances, raised eyebrows, knowing smiles. They'd been trying to set me up for years. With doctors, with patients' brothers, with anyone who seemed suitable. And here was this man, handsome in that distinguished way, gray at the temples, tailored suit, finding his own way to me. He's interested, Martha whispered. The head nurse. Mi mentor. My friend. Don't overthink it, Caroline. Sometimes good things just happen. I'd spent my whole life overthinking, analyzing every possibility, preparing for every outcome. It was what made me a good nurse. It was what made me lonely. Maybe Martha was right. Maybe this was just a good thing happening. Maybe I could let it happen. Without questioning it to death, I found that intoxicating. Being noticed, being remembered, being worth the effort of observation. He came back the day after that. And the day after that, always with coffee, always with that smile, always finding reasons to talk a little longer. I learned things about him, small things that felt important. He'd been married before. It hadn't worked out. He didn't like to talk about it, which I understood. Everyone has pain they'd rather not share. He had a house in the suburbs. Too big for one person, he said. Too quiet. He filled the silence with work, with golf, with routines that kept him busy. He noticed I looked tired sometimes, brought me lunch on long shift days, remembered which vending machine snacks I hated, remembered that I couldn't eat before trauma calls. These small kindnesses accumulated, like snow, soft and gentle, until I was buried in them, until I couldn't imagine digging out. Dennis worked in insurance. Risk assessment, he'd say with that slight smile. Like it was amusing. Like he found irony in assessing risks when life itself was the biggest gamble. He took me to nice restaurants. Never made me feel silly for not knowing which fork to use. He ordered wine and explained the regions without condescension. He asked about my work and actually listened. He remembered the details I mentioned. Names of patients? Difficult cases. The surgeon who made my life miserable. When he proposed after 8 months, it felt like, finally, someone saw me as worth keeping. Finally, someone chose me. Finally, I wasn't the leftover, the unmarried nurse, the one my mother sighed about at family gatherings. We got married at City Hall. Small ceremony, just us. A judge who rushed through the vows, a bailiff who served as witness, fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. I wore a cream-colored dress, not white. Too old for white, I thought. Too practical for a big gown. Dennis wore his best suit, the navy one with the silk tie. He looked handsome, distinguished, like a man you could trust. His explanation for the small ceremony made sense at the time. He'd been through an expensive wedding before, and it had ended badly. The first wife, Carolyn, she'd wanted the fairy tale, he said. The enormous dress, the 300 guests, the destination honeymoon. And look how that turned out. Why tempt fate with a big production? Why spend money on a party? When the marriage was what mattered. The commitment, the partnership, the decades ahead. I thought it was mature, practical. I thought it showed wisdom. He'd learned from his mistakes. He was being sensible. I didn't know then that there was no Carolyn in Oregon. No first wife who'd remarried. No amicable split. Just Patricia in Greendale. Still married. Still waiting. Still thinking she had a husband who loved her. In his way. The wedding photos were few. The judge didn't offer to take any. I asked a passing clerk to snap one. Dennis and me on the courthouse steps, smiling, hopeful. 2 people at the beginning of what I thought was forever, of what was actually nothing. We went to dinner that night. A Nice restaurant, candles on the table, wine that cost more than my weekly groceries. We toasted to our future, to growing old together, to the life we'd build. I believed every word. The honeymoon was a long weekend. In a coastal town 3 hours north, a bed and breakfast with ocean views, morning coffee on a deck, watching the waves, feeling for once completely at peace. He was attentive then, romantic even, holding my hand on walks, bringing me shells from the beach, small gestures that seemed to mean everything. I thought I'd finally found it. The partnership my friends had, the companionship my mother said I'd never find, the love I'd almost given up hoping for. I was 32 and married. Late bloomer, finally bloomed. Ready for the next chapter. Ready for children. Ready for everything. I didn't know the chapter I was starting had already been written for someone else. My mother was disappointed about the lack of a proper wedding. But then, my mother had made disappointment her primary form of communication. At least Dennis wanted me enough to make it legal, I thought. Legal. That word would come back to haunt me, would echo in my head for years, would become the cruelest irony of my entire life. The first decade was fine, not passionate, but stable. Dennis worked long hours. I worked nights at the hospital, 3 12-hour shifts a week, sometimes for Sometimes 5 when they were short-staffed. We had a rhythm. Ships passing in the night. But comfortable ships, safe harbors. He handled all the finances. You work hard enough, he'd say. Let me take care of the paperwork. It seemed generous then. Like he was taking care of me? Like he was protecting me from boring administrative tasks, like a good husband would. He put my paychecks into our account, paid the bills, managed the investments. I never questioned it. Why would I? This was my husband. This was the man who'd chosen me, the man who brought me coffee, the man who remembered which fork confused me at restaurants. We bought a house in year 5. Well, he bought a house. My name didn't go on the deed because my credit wasn't as strong, he explained. But at me later. Later never came, but there was always a reason. Timing wasn't right. Interest rates were bad. Refinancing complications. Tax implications. Always something. I trusted him. God, did I trust him? I trusted him the way you trust the floor under your feet. The way you trust gravity to keep you grounded. The way you trust that tomorrow will come after today. Year 12, I wanted a baby. I was 44 by then. Still young enough. Barely. The biological clock wasn't just ticking. It was screaming. Dennis said we should wait until we were more financially stable. We were stable. I knew we were stable. But he controlled the accounts. He knew the numbers. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe we needed more time. Year 15, he said he was too old to start over with diapers. He was 56. I was 47. Too old, he said. Too tired. Not fair to the child. I cried that night. In the bathroom, with the shower running so he wouldn't hear. I cried for the babies I'd never have. The nursery I'd never paint. The first words I'd never hear. Year 18, I stopped asking. Stopped hoping. Stopped imagining tiny fingers wrapped around mine. By then, I'd turned my maternal energy toward others. My nieces and nephews, my friends' kids. The young nurses I mentored at work. The students who came through the ER, wide-eyed and terrified, looking to me for guidance. I told myself it was enough. Some women don't get to be mothers. I could be other things. I was other things. I was a good nurse, a good aunt, a good mentor, a good wife. Wasn't I? When I hit 55 and started talking about retirement, Dennis got strange, tense, different. He'd always been controlled. That insurance adjuster precision, every movement calculated, every word measured. But this was different. He started working later. Coming home at 9, 10, sometimes 11. Taking weekend trips for conferences. Industry events, he said. Networking opportunities. He became obsessed with his phone, angling it away when I walked by, tilting the screen so I couldn't see, taking calls in other rooms, deleting messages before I could glimpse them. Classic affair behavior, I thought. I even laughed about it with my friend Joyce. One morning after a shift, at the diner where we always debriefed. 30 years in and he's finally getting predictable, I said, stirring my coffee, trying to sound casual, trying to sound like it didn't matter. Next, he'll buy a red sports car and start wearing cologne. Joyce raised an eyebrow. You're taking this very calmly. At our age? Joyce, if Dennis wants to have some crisis, let him. I'm too tired to care about his midlife drama. I've been changing bedpans for 12 hours. His little secrets can wait. I didn't know then how much I'd wish it had just been an affair. An affair would have been simple. An affair would have been normal. An affair I could have survived, could have left, could have walked away from with my dignity intact. What I found was so much worse. The folder appeared 3 months after that temporary comment. I wasn't snooping. That's the irony. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't looking for evidence. I was just looking for our insurance paperwork. My car had been hit in a parking lot. Some idiot in a pickup truck backed right into my driver's side door. Left a note at least. But I needed our insurance information to file the claim. Dennis kept everything filed in his home office, organized with that maddening precision of his color-coded folders, alphabetical tabs, everything in its proper place. I knew exactly where the auto insurance would be. Third drawer, manila folder labeled vehicle coverage. I'd seen it before. Dennis had shown me the system once. Years ago. Back when I'd asked about the finances. Back before I'd stopped asking, I opened the drawer, reached for the folder, and stopped. There was a different folder on top, unmarked. No label, no tab, just a plain manila folder, sitting where nothing plain had ever sat before. Unusual for Dennis, who labeled everything, who couldn't stand disorder, who arranged his sock drawer by color. I almost pushed it aside, almost reached past it for the auto insurance, almost went on with my day. Almost, but something made me open it. Maybe intuition, maybe 30 years of nursing, where you learn that the thing people hide is usually the thing that matters most. Inside a marriage certificate, Dennis Franklin Morrison, married to Patricia Ann Delacroix. Date, the 14th of June, 1981. I stared at it for a long moment, my brain trying to make it make sense, trying to find a reasonable explanation. Some paperwork from his first marriage, obviously, except I knew his first wife's name, Carolyn. He'd mentioned her a handful of times over the years, said she'd remarried, moved to Oregon, that the marriage had ended badly. This wasn't Carolyn. This was Patricia Ann Delacroix, a name I'd never heard, a woman I'd never known existed. I flipped through the folder, my hands starting to shake, my heart starting to race. There was a deed to a house in a town 40 miles north, Greendale. I'd never been there. Never had a reason to go. Patricia A. Morrison, owner, Morrison. His last name, her last name. Utility bills in her name at that address. Recent ones, from this year, from last month. Bank statements showing monthly deposits from an account I didn't recognize. An account I'd never seen. An account that wasn't in our system. Regular deposits. Automatics. Like clockwork. $2,500 a month. Going back years. And then, stapled together in a neat bundle. Life insurance policies, all on me. Caroline Jean Thompson. Not Morrison. Never legally Morrison, I would soon learn. 5 different policies, from 5 different companies, the oldest from 10 years ago, 25万美元, then $350, then $500, then $500,000 from a different company. The most recent, dated 4 months ago, 75万美元, $2,350,000. Total. All on my life. All with Dennis as beneficiary. The progression was methodical, careful, the kind of thing someone would do if they were building towards something underneath the policies. Printed emails, queries about accidental death clauses, questions about payout timelines. How long until the check arrives? What documentation is needed? How do investigators verify accidents? And then, buried at the bottom, printouts from websites, staging accidents, investigation red flags, how life insurance companies investigate claims, accidental false statistics by age group, staircase injuries, medical examiner perspectives, home accidents that look suspicious. My hand started shaking, really shaking. Not the nervous tremor of surprise, the full-body earthquake of terror. I sat down right there, on the floor of his office. That folder spread around me, like evidence at a crime scene, because that's what it was. Evidence of a crime. A crime that hadn't happened yet, but would, soon. If Dennis had his way, 30 years? 30 years I'd lived with this man. Slept beside him. Nursed him through 2 surgeries. His gallbladder in 2005. His knee replacement in 2019. I'd changed his bandages. Monitored his medications. Made sure he recovered. I'd believed I was building a life. A partnership. A future. I'd been building nothing. I'd been an investment property. He was waiting to liquidate. The sound of the garage door opening sent me scrambling. I shoved everything back into the folder, exactly as I'd found it. My nursing training kicked in. In a crisis, your hands know what to do, even when your brain has short-circuited, even when your heart is breaking, even when your entire world is collapsing. I closed the drawer, walked calmly to the kitchen, started chopping vegetables for dinner. Normal. Everything normal. My hands were steady with the knife. Years of surgical nursing. Years of emergency training. My body knew how to function in crisis. Even if my mind was screaming, Dennis came in. Kissed my cheek. He always did that. The small affections. That made it all feel real. How was your day? Fine, I said, my voice steady. Not a tremor, not a hint. Quiet day. How was work? The usual. He loosened his tie. Risk assessment never changes. Same problems, different idiots making them. I watched him walk away. Watched him go to change his clothes. Watched him like I was seeing him for the first time. And I thought, you're the risk. You've always been the risk. And you don't even know I know. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to him breathe. The same rhythm I'd heard for 30 years. In and out. In and out. So peaceful. So ordinary. So terrifying. I planned. Not revenge. Not yet. First, I needed to understand the full scope. How deep did this go? Who was Patricia? Was she a victim too? Or was she complicit? And most importantly, was I in immediate danger? Or did I have time? The next morning, after Dennis left for work, I went back to that folder, photographed every page with my phone. The marriage certificate, the deed, the utility bills, the bank statements, the insurance policies, all 5 of them, the emails, the printouts, everything. Then I started my research. Patricia Ann Morrison, née Delacroix, age 71, living in a modest house in Greendale, 40 miles north, just like the deed said. And according to public records, still married to Dennis Franklin Morrison. Their marriage had never been dissolved, never even filed for separation, never divorced, still legally valid, which meant my marriage certificate, the one we'd framed, the one hanging in our bedroom all these years, the one I looked at every morning, was worth less than the paper it was printed on. I wasn't Dennis's wife. Legally, I'd never been his wife. Our wedding hadn't been a wedding. It had been a performance, affreux, a 30-year lie. Every asset we'd accumulated, everything I thought was ours, the house, the cars, the retirement accounts, the investments, all of it, belonged solely to him. My paychecks for 30 years, deposited into accounts in his name, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Money I'd earned, money I'd worked for, money from 60-hour weeks, from night shifts, from holidays spent at the hospital, from missing my niece's birthdays, from sacrificing everything. All of it, gone. Never mine, never ours. I'd been paying for my own eventual murder, without even knowing it. The question was, what to do about it? I could confront Dennis. Satisfying, briefly, but stupid. If he was planning to kill me, tipping him off would only accelerate his timeline. He might panic, might act before he was ready, might push me down those stairs tonight. I could go to the police. But with what? Suspicious web searches and life insurance policies. Während illegal. People research weird things all the time. People buy insurance all the time. Even a lot of insurance. I think my husband might be planning to kill me. Would get me a sympathetic nod. And a brochure about domestic violence resources. Nothing actionable. Nothing that would keep me safe. I could run, but where? I had no money of my own. Dennis had seen to that. Every paycheck into his accounts, every dollar controlled by him. And running from a man who assessed risk for a living seemed foolish. He'd fit me. He knew how to calculate odds, how to minimize uncertainty, how to close loopholes. So I did what any 30-year nursing veteran would do. I stayed calm, gathered information, and planned for the worst. First, I needed money. I started pulling small amounts of cash from the weekly grocery budget. Dennis gave me $400 a week for groceries. Cash, always. I liked his system. I started buying generic instead of name brand, using coupons, shopping sales, skipping the expensive cuts of meat. Dennis never noticed. He never paid attention to what we ate. $20 here, $50 there, hidden in a tampon box in my closet. The one place I knew Dennis would never look. The one place that was truly mine. It added up slowly, week by week, month by month. I was building my escape fund, one grocery trip at a time. Second, I documented everything. I photographed the folder again, multiple times from different angles. I backed up the photos to a new email account Dennis didn't know about, a Gmail address I created at the library, on a public computer, where he couldn't trace it. I printed copies, stored them in a safe deposit box. At a bank across town, a bank we'd never used, a bank where no one knew Dennis. Paid for with cash, of course. I gave copies to Joyce, told her to open them if anything happened to me. If I had an accident, if I fell down the stairs, if I died unexpectedly. She didn't ask questions. Not many. Just looked at me with those nurses' eyes, the ones that had seen everything, and nodded. Third, I did my own research, not on how to stage accidents. On how to expose them, I learned about insurance fraud investigations, how companies detect suspicious claims, the red flags that trigger deeper scrutiny, multiple policies from multiple companies, recent policy increases before death, beneficiaries with financial problems. I learned about bigamy laws. It was a felony in our state, up to 5 years in prison. Plus fin, plus restitution. I learned about what happens when a man's first wife is very much alive and very much still legally his wife. Everything he'd built on that false marriage could be challenged, could be unwound, could be reclaimed. Fourth, I found Patricia. This was the part I dreaded most. Did she know about me? Was she complicit? Had she been part of this scheme all along, taking her cut of my paychecks, waiting for my death alongside Dennis? Or was she another victim? Another woman deceived? Another life stolen? There was only one way to find out. I drove to Greendale on a Thursday afternoon. When Dennis thought I was at a seminar, a continuing education course at the hospital, he never checked, never questioned. Why would he? His temporary wife had always been reliable. The house was small, TD, a one-story cottage with a neat lawn. But I noticed the modifications immediately. Wheelchair ramps, grab bars visible through the front window, medical equipment modifications. My nurse's eye clocked them automatically. Someone here was disabled. Someone needed care. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to gather courage, trying to figure out what to say, trying to prepare for whatever I might find. Then I got out, walked up the ramp, and knocked. The woman who answered was in a wheelchair, frail, thin, her hands shaking with what looked like early Parkinson's. MS? Something degenerative, something cruel. She looked at me with curious but kind eyes. No suspicion, no hostility, just gentle inquiry. Can I help you? Mrs. Morrison? Patricia Morrison? Yes? Cautious now. A stranger at the door. A stranger using her married name. My name is Caroline. I think I've been married to your husband. For 30 years, she didn't scream, didn't slam the door, didn't reach for a phone to call the police. She just went very still. And then she said, "You'd better come in." Her living room was modest, comfortable, a hospital bed in what should have been a dining room, medical supplies organized on a rolling cart, the house of someone who'd adapted to illness, who'd made peace with limitation, who'd built a life within constraints. She offered tea. I accepted. Neither of us drank it. The cups sat between us, getting cold. While we compared notes, Patricia had met Dennis in 1979, 2 years before their wedding. She'd been a secretary at his first insurance company. Young, pretty, ambitious. He'd been charming then, too. Confident, attentive. The man who remembered details, who made you feel seen. They married in 1981. A proper wedding. Church ceremony. White dress. 75 guests. Her parents were still alive then. They'd approved of Dennis. Good job. Good future. Good provider. By 1985, he'd taken over all her finances. To help, he said. Because her MS made handling paperwork difficult. Because her hands shook when she wrote checks. Because he loved her. Because he wanted to take care of her. Sound familiar? By 1990, he was spending more and more time traveling for work, conferences, client meetings, industry events. The same excuses he used on me. The same disappearing act. By 1995, she barely saw him at all. Once a month, maybe. Sometimes less. He sends money every month, she said, her voice quiet. Resigned. Enough to cover my care. I thought it was guilt. I thought maybe he had another family somewhere. But I never had proof. And honestly, I needed the money too much to push. Did you ever try to divorce him? Once? In 2003? He talked me out of it. Said we'd lose too much in lawyers' fees. Said it was better to keep things as they were. Said he still loved me. In his way, said he'd always take care of me. She paused, her shaking hands clasping in her lap. I was too sick to fight. The MS had progressed by then. I needed help with everything. The money he sent, it kept me in my home, kept me out of a facility, kept me alive, really. She looked at me with something like wonder, something like grief, something like the beginning of anger. You said 30 years? Almost 31. Does he know you're here? No. Good. She reached out, gripped my hand with surprising strength. Her shaking fingers closed around mine, holding tight. Keep it that way. We became allies that afternoon. 2 women, united by the same man's decades of deception. Patricia couldn't travel, couldn't testify in court, couldn't fight the way she once might have. Her body had betrayed her long ago. But she could provide documentation. Bank records she'd kept, letters Dennis had written, photographs with timestamp, the marriage certificate she'd never thrown away. Proof that their marriage had never ended. Proof that mine had never begun. Before I left, she told me something else. Something that made the folder even more terrifying. There was another woman, she said. Before you. Carolyn? He told me about her once. When he was drunk, said she'd had an accident. A car accident. Single vehicle. Off a bridge. My blood went cold. When? 1993. A year before you met him, I think. He said it was tragic. Said she lost control on a wet road. Said these things happen. I remembered Dennis mentioning Carolyn. His first wife, he'd said. The one who'd remarried and moved to Oregon. The one who taught him to be careful. He'd lied. About everything. Carolyn hadn't remarried. Carolyn was dead, and Dennis had probably killed her. Armed with this, I went to a lawyer, not a local one. Someone in the city, someone Dennis didn't know. Someone who couldn't be reached by his connections. I found Elena Martinez through a domestic violence hotline. They gave referrals, no questions asked. No names recorded. Her office was downtown, 17th floor of a glass building. The kind of place that smelled like money, like power, like justice, if you could afford it. I explained everything, showed her the evidence, the photographs, the policies, the printouts, had Trisha's documentation. I asked what my options were. Martinez leaned back in her chair, whistled low. This is a lot. I'm aware. You're legally not married, which means you have no claim to marital assets. Everything he has is his, including the house you live in. And the bank accounts your paychecks went into, I know, I'd already made peace with that. 30 years of earnings. Gone. I couldn't get them back. I could only go forward. But she tapped her pen against the desk. Bigamy is a crime. Fraud is a crime. And if we can prove he was planning to kill you for insurance money, that's also a crime. That's attempted murder conspiracy. She smiled. Sharp and predatory. The kind of smile that made you glad she was on your side. That's prison time. Significant prison time. How do we prove it? That's where it gets tricky. The research he did, the policies. It's suggestive but not conclusive. A good defense attorney would say he was just being prudent, planning for contingencies, protecting his family. She said that last word with heavy irony. Family. What family? A bigamist's outing. We need more, she said. Something explicit. Something that shows intent. What if I could get him to talk? To admit it? Recording laws in this state require one-party consent. If you're part of the conversation, you can record it legally and use it as evidence. I went home that night with a small digital recorder in my purse and a script in my head. It took 3 weeks to get what we needed. 3 weeks of playing the devoted wife, of swallowing my rage. Every time Dennis kissed my cheek, every time he called me honey, every time he asked how my day was, like he cared, like I mattered, like I was anything more than an insurance policy waiting to pay out. 3 weeks of carefully steering conversations toward retirement, toward finances, toward the future, toward death. And then, one night over dinner, I asked the question that cracked him open. Dennis, what happens if one of us dies first? Do we have enough insurance? He looked up from his steak, something flickering in his eyes, a spark of interest, a flash of calculation. Why do you ask? Janet at work. Her husband died last month, heart attack, completely unexpected. She's struggling because they didn't have enough coverage. I kept my voice light, concerned, wifely, the good nurse worrying about practical matters. I just want to make sure we're prepared. Dennis set down his fork, and I watched him decide something. Watched the gears turn behind his eyes. Watched him calculate risk. The way he always did. We're well covered. Very well covered, actually. Oh, good. I didn't know you'd bought additional policies. I've been building our portfolio for years. He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. It never reached his eyes. I just hadn't noticed before. You're worth quite a lot, Caroline. More than you know. The recorder caught everything. Over the next 2 weeks, I got more. Comments about how convenient it would be if certain things happened, if I retired early, if I was home more. If I was less mobile, discussions about policy payout timeline, how quickly the money would come, what he'd do with it. Travel, he said. See the world, finally live. Even after a few glasses of wine one night. A chilling admission. You know what the perfect crime is, Caroline? Something that looks like an accident? Everyone believes in accidents. The stairs are dark. You lose your balance. Tragic, but understandable. Nobody suspects a thing. He laughed after he said it. Like it was a joke. Like we were sharing a dark fantasy. Like I was in on it. I laughed too. Made myself laugh while the recorder caught every word, every pause, every inflection. I had enough. More than enough. The day I confronted Dennis was a Tuesday. Unremarkable. Ordinary. Just another day in a 30-year marriage that had never existed. I'd sent copies of everything to my lawyer, to Patricia, to 3 trusted friends with instructions. If anything happened to me, if I had an accident, if I fell downstairs, if my car went off a bridge, the packages would be opened, the police would be called, the truth would come out. I'd arranged for Joyce to call me at exactly 7 p.m. to confirm I was alive. If I didn't answer, she'd call 911. I wasn't taking any chances. Dennis came home to find me sitting at the kitchen table. That folder spread in front of me. The marriage certificate, the policies, the printouts, everything. I'd positioned the papers carefully. The marriage certificate to Patricia on top. The most damning first. Let him see it immediately. Let the shock hit before he could calculate. The kitchen was clean. I'd spent the afternoon cleaning, wiping down counters, organizing cabinets. Nervous energy that needed somewhere to go. The house had never been so spotless. The house that wasn't mine had never been mine. He came through the garage door, keys jingling, that familiar sound. That sound that used to mean safety, that now meant danger had arrived. Caroline? His voice confused, seeing me at the table, not cooking dinner. Not setting plates, just sitting, waiting. He walked closer, saw the papers, stopped. His face went through several expressions. In quick succession, more than I'd expected, more than he usually showed. Surprise first, genuine surprise. He hadn't known I'd found the folder, hadn't suspected a thing. All those weeks of recordings. All those conversations about insurance, he thought I was just a curious wife, just innocent Caroline, still playing her part, then calculation, the gears turning behind his eyes. Risk assessment in real time. What does she know? How did she find out? What are my options? Can this be contained? Then denial, the slight shake of his head, the adjustment of his tie. The attempt to project normalcy, even now, even caught, and finally, that controlled calm I'd learned to despise. The mask he wore, the mask I'd mistaken for strength, for security, for love. He set his briefcase down, slowly, deliberately, buying time, buying himself space to think. Caroline, what's all this? His voice was gentle. Concerned, like he was talking to someone fragile, someone confused, someone who needed to be handled. Cut the act. My voice was steady, stronger than I'd expected, stronger than I'd ever been with him. I know everything about Patricia, about Carolyn, about the insurance policies, and your little accidental death research. I know you were planning to kill me. He laughed, actually laughed. A short, dismissive sound. That's insane. You're not thinking clearly. The trauma of whatever happened. Don't. I stood up, looked him in the eye. Don't try to gaslight me, Dennis. Don't try to make me think I'm crazy. That's what you do, isn't it? That's what you did to Patricia. Made her doubt herself. Made her need you. made her dependent. It won't work on me. Not anymore. His expression flickered. Just for a moment. Something like respect. Something like fear. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected me to fight back. His temporary wife, finally showing teeth. I have recordings, Dennis. Conversation. Plans. Everything. Your confession about how convenient my accidental death would be. Patricia's testimony about the bigamy. Your first wife's suspicious car accident. I have everything. He sat down slowly, the controlled calm cracking. Just a little. Just enough to show fear underneath. What do you want? I want you to understand something. For 30 years, I believed I was building a life with you. I worked 60-hour weeks at a hospital, dealing with death and suffering, and came home to a marriage I thought was real. You stole that from me. You stole my time, my earning years, my chance at a real family. You can't give any of that back. Caroline, I'm not finished. You're going to experience what it feels like to have your life dismantled, piece by piece, starting now. Over the next 3 weeks, I executed my own careful plan. First, I filed for divorce, citing fraud and bigamy. Since we were never legally married, I couldn't claim assets through divorce, but the filing was public record. News spreads fast in a small community, especially when it involves insurance fraud. Within a week, everyone knew. The neighbors, the golf buddies, the colleagues, everyone. Second, I sent a carefully compiled package to Dennis's employer. Evidence of the bigamy, the multiple life insurance policies, the suspicious death of his first wife. I included a note pointing out that a man who commits insurance fraud in his personal life might not be the best person to be assessing risk and fraud. For a major insurance company, Dennis was fired within a week. 32 years at that company. Gone. Like it never happened. Like he never happened. Third, I sent copies of everything to the insurance companies, the ones he'd been planning to defraud. Turns out, insurance companies don't appreciate being scammed. They pursued him with the same relentless efficiency he'd once used in his job. Investigators, lawyers, forensic accountants, the machinery of corporate justice. Grinding slowly, but grinding fine. Fourth, and this was my favorite part, I introduced Patricia to a very good lawyer who specialized in elder law. Turns out, Dennis had been siphoning money from Patricia's accounts for years. Money that should have been set aside for her care. Money she thought was safe. Money he'd been stealing. While pretending to provide for her, the lawyer was very interested in that. So was the district attorney's office. I didn't testify at Dennis's criminal trial. I didn't need to. But I was there every single day, sitting in the gallery, watching. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights that hummed, the smell of old paper and stale coffee, and fear. You could smell the fear on Dennis. That careful cologne couldn't hide it. He wore his good suit, the charcoal gray one, the one I'd picked out for him years ago for an industry conference. He looked distinguished then, confident, in control. Now he looked smaller. Hola. The suit hung on him differently, like he'd shrunk inside it, like the weight of his lies had finally pulled him down. His lawyer was expensive, paid for with money that should have been mine. Should have been Patricia's, should have been for our futures. Instead, funding his defense. But even the best lawyer couldn't argue with the evidence. Patricia testified on the second day. They wheeled her to the witness stand, her chair positioned so the jury could see her clearly, see the tremors in her hands, see the illness that had defined her life, see what Dennis had exploited. She spoke clearly. Despite everything, despite the disease that had taken so much from her, her voice was steady. She told them about the marriage, 1981. The church, the white dress, the promises, the way he'd seemed so perfect. She told them about the MS diagnosis. 1984. The way he'd stepped up at first, handled the bills, took care of the paperwork, said it was the least he could do. For his wife, in sickness and in health. She told them how slowly he'd disappeared. More travel, more conferences, more nights away, until he was a ghost in her own marriage. A monthly check that arrived like clockwork, and nothing else. Did you know about Caroline? The prosecutor asked. Patricia looked at me then. Across the courtroom, 2 women connected by the same betrayal. No, she said. I suspected there might be someone, another family maybe, but I didn't know her name, didn't know anything, until she showed up at my door. The bravest thing anyone's ever done for me? The defense attorney tried to argue that Patricia was confused, that her illness affected her memory, that she couldn't be trusted. But Patricia had kept records, letters Dennis had written, cards for anniversaries, all dated, all saved, all proving she was still his wife. While he was marrying me, the jury believed her. You could see it in their faces, the way they looked at Dennis after, not with anger, with disgust, with the particular contempt reserved for men who hurt vulnerable women. Dennis's golf buddy testified next. Rick Chambers. I'd met him at company parties, shook his hand, made small talk about handicaps and weather. Never knowing he held my life in his hands, Rick had been granted immunity. For his cooperation, he looked uncomfortable on the stand, sweating through his dress shirt, a man who'd kept secrets, now forced to tell them. He told the court about the conversations. After rounds of golf, at the 19th hole, when Dennis had one too many scotches, when his control slipped, when he talked about the future, he said Caroline was getting old, Rick testified. Said she'd worked hard her whole life. Said she deserved a rest. Said it would be a mercy, really. If something happened, did he specify what might happen? The prosecutor asked. Rick shifted in his seat. He talked about stairs. Dark stairs? How easy it would be for someone her age to lose her balance. The courtroom went quiet. The jury stared at Dennis. Dennis stared at the table. His lawyer made notes. But there was nothing to note. Nothing could explain that away. Did you believe he was serious? The prosecutor continued. I thought he was just talking, just venting. Men say things they don't mean. Rick paused. But then I found out about the insurance policies, and I realized he meant every word. The recordings came next. My voice and Dennis's playing through the courtroom speakers, tinny and small, but clear. You're worth quite a lot, Caroline. More than you know. The jury heard it all. The discussions about convenient timing, the jokes about accidents, the way he'd calculated my value, down to the dollar. When the recording of the stairs conversation played, one of the jurors put her hand over her mouth. Another shook his head. I watched Dennis's face. Watched him hear himself. Hear the monster he'd become. His expression never changed. That careful control. Even now, even facing the evidence, he wouldn't admit what he was. The evidence spoke for itself. Dennis Franklin Morrison was convicted. Fraude, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. The prosecutor couldn't prove he'd killed Carolyn. Too much time had passed. The evidence was gone. The body had been cremated. The investigation had been closed decades ago. But the circumstantial evidence painted a clear picture. For anyone who cared to look, for anyone who could see patterns, for anyone who understood risk, 3 years in prison, followed by probation and restitution. 3 years. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. For 30 years of my life, for the children I never had, for the money I earned and never kept, for the trust I gave and never should have. But I didn't need the legal system to give me justice. I'd already taken it. The real satisfaction came in smaller ways. The day Dennis's name appeared in the newspaper, attached to words like bigamist and fraud, the headlines that would follow him forever, the Google results that would never go away, the way his friends stopped calling, the golf buddies who'd laughed at his jokes for decades, gone like they'd never known him, the way his comfortable retirement evaporated, the pension seized for restitution, the investments frozen pending investigation, the house sold to pay legal fees, everything he'd built on my labor, on Patricia's trust, on Carolyn's life, gone. The way I got to rebuild my life, finally, on my own terms. The day after the verdict, I drove to Greendale, to Patricia's house, with a bottle of champagne, the good kind, the kind I'd never bought before, 'cause Dennis said it was a waste of money. She was waiting on her porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm day. Her aide had helped her outside, so she could see me arrive. I parked and walked up the ramp, champagne in hand, tears already forming. "We did it," I said. "We did it," she agreed. We drank champagne from paper cups, because her hands shook too much for glasses, because it didn't matter. Because we'd won, in our own way. Mitvom, Patricia and I became unlikely friends. Two women who should have been rivals, who should have hated each other, competing for the same man, fighting over the same lies. But there was nothing to fight over. Dennis had taken from both of us. The only thing left was to heal together. I started visiting every Sunday, 3-hour drives each way, but worth it. For the tea we actually drank, for the conversations that healed, for the understanding only she could give. She told me about her life before Dennis, the dreams she'd had, the dancer she'd wanted to be. Before the MS took that possibility, before she met a man who seemed like rescue and turned out to be ruin. I told her about the babies I'd wanted, the family I'd imagined, the future that had been stolen, not by circumstances, but by design, by Dennis's careful planning. We mourned together, the lives we should have had, the women we could have been, the decades lost to a man who saw us as investments. But mourning became something else, something lighter, something like hope. Patricia taught me to knit, her shaking hands steadier with the needles. Something about muscle memory, she said. Some things the body never forgets. I made terrible scarves at first, lumpy and uneven, more whole than fabric. But she praised every one, like they were masterpieces, like I was learning something more than craft. I brought her books from the city, the kind she couldn't find in Greendale, mysteries and thrillers. Stories of women who fought back, who survived, who won. Research, she called it. Learning from the experts. We laughed. We actually laughed. Two women who had every reason to cry, finding joy in the rubble, united instead by shared survival. I helped her navigate her MS care, connected her with better doctors, used my nursing network to find specialists, made sure she had the support she needed, the support Dennis had never really provided. Despite his monthly checks, she'd been another of Dennis's victims. Neither of us saw the point in punishing each other. For his sins, "You saved my life," she told me once, over tea in her living room. Real tea this time, that we actually drank. "You saved mine," I replied. We saved each other. I took the money I'd carefully saved, in a secret account Dennis never knew about. Not just the grocery money. Money from overtime shifts, carefully skimmed over the years. Because some part of me never fully trusted him. Even when I thought I did, it wasn't much. $40,000. 30 years of suspicion, hidden in plain sight. I bought a small condo near the beach. My name on the deed. My space, my walls, my view. I retired from nursing on my own schedule. Not when Dennis decided I'd outlived my usefulness, but when I was ready, when I'd saved enough, when I'd trained my replacement, when I could walk away with my head high, I traveled. For the first time in my life, really traveled. Not to nursing conferences, not to family obligations. Just for joy, just for me. Italy first. 'Cause I'd always dreamed of it. Since high school, when Mrs. Patterson showed us slides of Rome, the Colosseum, the fountains, the way the light fell on ancient stones. Dennis had said we'd go someday, when we were financially ready, when the timing was right, when we'd saved enough. Someday, the cruelest word in any language, I flew to Rome alone, 63 years old. First time on an international flight, heart pounding with fear and freedom. The plane touched down at dawn, and the light was exactly like Mrs. Patterson's slides. Golden, ancien, alive. I cried in the taxi to my hotel, not from sadness, from the overwhelming joy of finally being there, of finally keeping a promise, even if I was the only one who'd made it. I walked everywhere, my nursing legs strong enough to climb the Spanish steps, to wander the Vatican, to get lost in narrow streets, where laundry hung between buildings, and old women called down from windows. And the coffee was perfect. I ate pasta at midnight, gelato at breakfast, drank wine in piazzas, talked to strangers who became friends, for an hour, for an evening, for the length of a meal. No one knew me there. No one knew my story. I was just Caroline, the American woman who smiled too much, who asked too many questions, who wasn't afraid to be delighted. Greece came next, the islands. Santorini at sunset, the way the white buildings glowed pink and gold, the way the seas stretched forever, the way time seemed to stop. I rented a tiny room above a taverna, woke to the smell of baking bread, slept to the sound of waves, lived in the moment, the way I'd never allowed myself. I thought about Dennis sometimes, in his prison cell, eating institutional food, following institutional rules. The risk assessor finally caught, by his own calculated gambles. But I didn't think about him often. He'd taken enough of my thoughts, enough of my years. He didn't deserve my Greek sunsets, too. Portugal was softer, sadder somehow. The fado music playing in old cafes, the singers pouring out grief. And I understood. Some things you have to mourn before you can truly move on. I mourned there, in Lisbon, in the hills overlooking the river. I let myself feel it all. The wasted years, the stolen dreams, the children I never had, the life I thought I was living. That had never been real. I cried, really cried, the way I hadn't let myself since finding the folder. Since starting the fight, I'd been so focused on survival, on justice, on winning. I hadn't stopped to grieve. Portugal gave me that. The space to be sad. Before being grateful, the permission to feel it all. Without rushing toward healing, I came home different, lighter, more myself, ready to build something permanent. In a life that was finally mine, places I'd always wanted to see. Places Dennis had promised we'd visit someday. Someday that never came. Until I made it come myself. I joined a book club, made friends who knew nothing about my past, who just knew me as Caroline, the retired nurse who read too many mysteries, who laughed too loud at wine nights, who always brought the best cheese. I took a pottery class, discovered I was terrible at it, which was delightful, because I could be terrible at something, without it being a judgment on my worth, without anyone making me feel less than. For not being perfect, I dated a bit. Nothing serious, but it was novel. to enjoy someone's company without the constant background hum of, is this real? The answer didn't matter as much anymore. I knew who I was now. I knew what I deserved. I knew what I'd survived. Joyce and I still meet at the diner. After her shifts, she's still working, 62 and going strong. Says she'll retire when they carry her out. I just come to keep her company and to remember who I used to be, who I became. The journey in between. You know what's funny? I said one morning, watching the sunrise through the diner window, the same window I'd watched through for 20 years. The same coffee, the same booth, the same friend, but everything else different. Dennis spent 30 years planning for a comfortable retirement, building his little empire of fraud, calculating every risk, controlling every variable, and I'm the one who got it. Joyce raised her coffee cup to temporary women who turned out to be permanent. I'll drink to that. Dennis wrote me a letter from prison once, hand-delivered to my lawyer, who gave it to me sealed in case I wanted to read it. I burned it without opening it, whatever he had to say. I didn't need to hear. I'd spent enough years listening to his version of reality, his explanations, his justifications, his lies. The thing about being erased is that you become very light, untethered, free in a way you never expected. And once you're light enough, once you've stopped caring about the weight of what others think you should be, you can float away completely. You can build something new, something that actually belongs to you. I'm 65 now. 65 and finally free. I wake up in my condo. My condo. My name on the deed. My furniture chosen by me. My art on the walls. Paintings I bought in Portugal. Photographs from Greece. A small sculpture from Rome. Reminders of the woman I became. When no one was watching. When no one was controlling. The bedroom faces east. I chose it that way. So the sunrise wakes me. So every morning starts with light. After 30 years of darkness, I wanted light. My bed is too big for one person, but I bought it anyway. Because I could. Because no one told me it was impractical. Because spreading out in the middle, surrounded by pillows, felt like freedom. The kitchen is small, but perfect. Everything within reach. Everything organized my way. Not his system. Not his color-coded folders. Missystem, which is no system at all. Just things where I left them. Chaos that makes sense to me. I make coffee exactly the way I like it. Strong with real cream. Not the cheap creamer Dennis bought. Not the budget brand that saved us money. Real cream. Organic. Expensive. Because I can. Because every morning I get to choose. The coffee pot was a gift from Patricia. For my first birthday in the condo, she'd had her aide order it online. A fancy Italian machine. The kind Dennis would have called wasteful. For the woman who saved my life, her card said, may your coffee always be perfect. I cried when I opened it. Cried over a coffee pot. But it wasn't about the machine. It was about being known, being seen. By someone who understood. I'd drink my coffee on the balcony, watch the beach below. The joggers and dog walkers. The couples holding hands. The solitary figures like me. Finding peace in the waves. I walk on the beach. Let the waves wash over my feet. Watch the sunrise. Watch the sunset. Watch the world turn. Without me having to turn it. I call my nieces. Every Sunday, without fail, my sister's daughters. Now grown, now with children of their own. Emma is 34, a lawyer, fierce and brilliant. She reminds me of myself at that age, before Dennis. Before I learned to make myself smaller, she calls me for advice sometimes, not legal advice. Life advice, how to know when someone is trustworthy, how to spot the red flags, how to protect yourself, without becoming paranoid. I tell her what I know. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Never let anyone control your money. Keep something of your own. Always. Even if you think you don't need it. Even if they say it's unnecessary. Even if you feel guilty for not trusting completely. Sarah is 31. A teacher. Gantlardan her sister. She has 2 children. Twins. A boy and a girl. 5 years old. The babies I never had. Given to me anyway. In a different form, I visit them often. Bring gifts I shouldn't. Spoil them the way grandmothers do. Even though I'm their great aunt. Even though the title is different. The love is the same. They call me Auntie Caroline. They run to the door when I arrive. They show me their drawings, their toys, their important things, and I listen. Really listen. The way no one listened to me. For 30 years, I help Patricia with her medical appointments. Drive up to Greendale twice a month. Take her to specialists. Sit with her during treatments. Hold her shaking hand. While nurses I used to train now help another woman I love. We've become family. The strangest family. Built on betrayal. Healed through choice. Sisters in suffering, she called us once. But survivors in triumph, we laughed. The way only we can. At the absurdity. At the cruelty. At the fact that we found each other. In the wreckage of one man's lies. The family I helped raise, even when I couldn't have my own. I help Patricia with her medical appointments. Drive up to Greendale twice a month. Take her to her specialists. Sit with her during treatments. The sister I never had, found in the strangest way. I live fully in a reality that I've chosen. Not one someone else constructed around me. Not one built on lies and fraud. Not one designed to end with my death. Sometimes people ask me how I'm doing, and they expect me to say I'm still angry. Still what? Still processing the betrayal. And sure, sometimes I am. 30 years doesn't disappear just because you've escaped it. The trauma lives in the body. In the moments I still lock the doors twice. In the nightmares that sometimes come. In the flinch when someone makes a sudden movement. But mostly, I'm good. Really genuinely good. Because here's what Dennis never understood. About temporary things. They end. And when they end, something else begins. Something better. Something real. Something permanent. You know that feeling. When you finally put down something heavy that you've been carrying for so long. You forgot it was heavy at all. That moment when your shoulders drop and your spine straightens. And you think, this is what it feels like to stand up straight. That's where I am now, standing up straight, looking ahead. Finally, blessedly, myself. If you've ever felt like a placeholder in your own life, like you were temporary in a space where you thought you belonged, like someone was using you for something you didn't understand, I hope you find your way out. Not with rage. Though rage has its place, rage kept me going some nights. Rage gave me energy when I had none left. Not with revenge, though that can be satisfying too. Watching Dennis's world crumble felt like justice, felt like balance, felt like finally, but with the simple radical act of believing you deserve better, of knowing that temporary is sometimes exactly what you need to be before you become permanent. In a life that's actually worth living, I'm here, on my beach, in my condo, in my life, and I'm not going anywhere. Not for anyone. Not ever again. Come sit with me a while. If you'd like, the coffee's always fresh, and the view is pretty good from here.